Allegedly, they managed to actually open the door to hell and summon a demon.
Neighbors claimed they practice witchcraft.
Exorcism, the casting out of demons through ritual prayer.
I was burying bodies out in the desert.
And yes, the ghosts were there with us.
Thank you for letting us in.
Welcome back to the Haunted Heart Podcast, folks. We are your hosts, Kenny, that's me.
And some bitch.
That's her.
Otherwise known as Katie, one name like Prince.
Katie, one name like Prince.
Mm-hmm.
Love that.
One day I'm going to shorten it to a symbol, although that probably wouldn't be very conducive for a sound-based medium.
Probably not.
Maybe it would just be like a sound, like a... That's my new name.
Someone at work today sent me a message and they said, "Hey, K." And I'm like, and they just, and literally just the letter K. And I'm
that
like, And I called it out too. I was like, did you really just call me K?
Mm-hmm. Quickest way to make this man angry is to shorten his name. And the shorter you make it, the angrier he gets. You know?
Yeah, that's true.
With the exception of Kenny, because that is somewhat shortened, but it's not so shortened.
No, Kenny's fine. But
when we dip down to like 3 letters and below, he really blacks out.
Don't. That's a curse word. Honestly,
I'm not going to say.
People at work are so bad about that. Like random people that message me at work, like that's what they start out with is the 3-letter word, and I'm like, you're really getting off on the wrong foot.
What, the 3-letter ass? Dear ass.
Hey, ass. Yeah. And you know what? Honestly,
to
I would
ass
prefer
it may
that.
pertain.
Yeah.
To ass it may concern. Best wishes. Warm regards, ass. I could see that. I could certainly see that. It's a whole vibe.
Very true. Very true. But we're back again. We missed you guys. We're here. And we're not
going to make any promises because every time we make a promise, like one of our lives falls apart. And, I've been on the short end of the stick, so I'm not gonna promise you shit, baby. I will see you when I see you, and I'm hoping I'm gonna see you on Wednesdays. And we'll just leave it at that. We'll just leave it unspoken because otherwise, if the universe gets tipped off that a girl's trying to get back on her bullshit,
you just have to end it. So we should just change the sign off to be like, "See you win."
See you win.
Just give it that real extra southern bit of, flair there. See you win.
True. We are heading into spooky season, though. Although it doesn't feel like it. It's about 1,000,000 degrees here. And it feels like the consistency of a clam chowder outside. It is very hot and soupy and thick.
Mm-hmm.
None of which is good for 2 huskies like us. So we're just trying to live and make it to October, but we do have our pumpkin things back. They're beginning to trickle back
Amen.
in. I've got a lovely pumpkin cold brew here.
Yes, and I have the new apple crisp macchiato from the Mermaid.
They don't pay us. No. Nope.
From the Mermaid.
They don't fucking pay us. Although, if they did, if I was on payroll, I would have them change the Mermaid siren logo into a more accurate representation of the mythical siren for Halloween. I feel like that would be cool as fuck.
Absolutely.
And really spooky, but
you remember when Starbucks used to, and there I go,
damn it. They don't pay us, Kenny. How do you ever expect to get sponsors on this show that we disappear from for months at a time?
Do you remember they used to do those fun Halloween drinks?
Yeah, the Frankenstein
they haven't done that
drink.
In the past few
and
years.
I know.
The zombie drink. Where is that?
They truly disappoint me. But I will say that the pumpkin cold brew that I'm sipping on is mighty good. Thanks, Ken.
In the show now. We're
So yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and drink that. And if anybody has a problem with it, much like our ASMR episode from way, 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 way back in the day, just don't.
Yeah.
I suggest that you don't.
No, don't do that. Well, by the way, that was something that we put on Patreon, which, speaking of Patreon, we do have a patron.
We do. We do.
We
God
do.
bless you.
Damn. Yeah.
We have
Wow.
the best patrons. They just hanging in. I mean, bless you.
Bless
Satan
ya.
bless every one of you.
Bless you. We love you. But we do. So, for those of you who may be new, when we receive,
If
a
you're new, I'm
patron-
sorry. Find another. Like maybe get some context if you're new on this one. Like,
Yeah, I have someone message me and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I just started your podcast today. Seems really great. I'm starting with episode 1," and I'm like,
yeah, people do that. I mean, it's okay to start a podcast with like the recent episodes, and I understand that is the term "recent" is a questionable term here at the Haunted Heart Podcast.
Yeah.
But it is okay to like start listening from like when we actually got like sound recording equipment instead of recording on potatoes. Like that's okay. You're not missing much, I feel, but I don't know. There's a bunch of OGs in our Facebook group who are like hardcore about those old episodes.
they are very
Bless
much so.
them.
So we would like to welcome to our round table here. Is it round or square?
It's very square.
Square?
It's painfully square.
Painfully square.
But there's a spot for everybody.
So we would like to welcome to our table Justin W., who is a member of our Trash Talent Aficionado.
Ooh, very trash.
Very trash. All right, Justin, your candle will be lit beside us throughout the rest of this episode, but forever and always in the darkest parts of our hearts.
The darkest, the dankest.
The soupiest.
Oh,
Ugh.
yes. Thank you to Justin and the rest of our Patreon supporters. We really appreciate you guys. And if you would like to support us, you can find us online at patreon.com/thehauntedheart. And you will find our back catalog of Patreon exclusive content, as well as all the different cool tiers. You
Yes.
too can be a trash talent aficionado, or a member of our Haunted Heart harem,
Mm-hmm.
or a Stay Spooky Squad member, or a cannibal cult.
Cannibal cult's really popular.
It is very popular. A lot of y'all are hungry.
So many cannibals.
Y'all just love chewing on a bone. Anyway, that's
Well,
the show. Are we
We're good.
Can we go home now?
Yeah, I think
are
so. I
we-
think I can unplug the mics now.
Cool. Like we
can go
lit
home,
the
we're done.
stage. We did that. We did the sound check.
Did the sound check.
We lit the
Yes, we did.
candle.
Lit the candle.
And we can head out now, right?
We're done.
That's
That's it.
wrap. Oh, are we supposed to? Is there something else we do?
I think
It's been a while.
I think well, I don't know about you. I don't think there's anything I'm doing. Which,
Oh shit!
We'll
Was I
see.
supposed to have something prepared?
You are.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I had homework.
Yeah, you kind of did, that. Yeah, I think it's your turn, right? Yeah.
I believe so.
I think it's my turn to just sit back, fucking relax, and drink my damn drink
Mm-hmm.
and be told a story.
A story.
A story with everybody else. So everybody else listening, I'm leaned back with y'all. Whatever y'all are doing, I'm with you. So just remember that, okay?
If you're cleaning the toilet right now, he's cleaning the toilet right now.
I'm standing
if
right over
you're
you.
at your job, clickety clacking on your computer, getting things done, he's right there with you, babe. If
Absolutely.
you're driving through traffic, raging, he's with you.
I'm with you right
he's
there.
with you. And I'm here to keep you company.
hmm
Luckily, I am a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the macabre.
An encyclopedia, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, just a bunch of useless information. No, I do have a story prepared for you, and it actually is so it's something that's kind of been on the list for a while. This is a big one. I would be surprised if I wouldn't necessarily call this like a like a heavy hitter in the way that a Ted Bundy or a John Wayne Gacy is, but this is certainly one of those cases. If you've been in the true crime space for any amount of time, you have probably heard this story. You've probably heard this case referenced, and it is a really interesting case. So we're going to talk about Mary Bell.
Who?
Mary Bell. Have you heard of Mary Bell?
Is that like she related to Bluebell?
I swear to God, I just knew you were going to look at me and be like, is she related to Taco Bell?
No, I was thinking Bluebell, like the ice cream.
No, neither actually, and way less fun than both. Mary Bell, this is why I love doing the show with you, because Mary Bell is like one of those figures in true crime that it's one of those perplexing cases. It is haunting, but also...
Question mark.
No, definitely haunting, but also kind of sad. And you'll kind of discover why as we...
Great. So I can expect to be haunted and sad at the end of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you what, it's a level up from my usual mood anyway. So.
I mean, that's most of our episodes, though.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
All right. So on Saturday, May 11th, 1968, a 3-year-old boy was discovered wandering dazed and bleeding in the vicinity of St. Margaret's Road, Scotswood. The child later informed police that he had been playing with 2 girls on the roof of an abandoned air raid shelter when one of the girls, which by the way, fucking metal. So they were playing on the top of this air raid shelter when one of the girls, the child was unsure which one exactly, pushed him 7 feet from the roof onto the ground, inflicting a severe laceration to his head. That same afternoon, the parents of 3 small girls also contacted police to complain that the same 2 girls, named Mary and Norma, had attempted to strangle their children as they played in a sand pit.
Damn.
Later that evening, both girls were interviewed about these incidents. Both denied any culpability for the air raid shelter incident, claiming that they had simply discovered the boy, bleeding heavily from a head wound after he had fallen. Further questioned about the attempted strangulation of the 3 girls, Mary denied any knowledge of the incident. However, Norma admitted that Mary had tried to, quote, throttle each of the girls, stating, quote, Mary went to one of the girls and said, "What happens if you choke someone? Do they die?" Then Mary put both hands around the girl's throat and squeezed. The girl started to go purple. I told Mary to stop, but she wouldn't. Then she put her hands around Pauline's throat and she started going purple as well. Another girl, Susan Cornish, came up and Mary did the same thing to her. End quote.
Oh, no. I imagine it went like this. Like, they're like, did you do this? And she's like, absolutely not. I found him bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like giving that dead stare.
You know, how you frequently just find 3-year-olds that have fallen off of air raid shelter
No,
roofs.
he fell. I don't know. I found him like that, officer. I don't know. And then she like, the little kid's like behind the officer. And then like, she's just like looking past him, like, say a
Staring.
damn thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. She was definitely a starer. I just want to know what kind of dystopian universe we're living in the late 60s where our children in the UK are playing on the top of air raid shelters left over from World War II. Like, yeah. I'm concerned.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yikes. So that was Norma's little interview.
So Norma snitch.
Mm-hmm. One could say that. It certainly would seem to be that way, would it not?
I feel like Mary don't like snitches. I'm just saying. I don't know. I don't want to, give away anything here. I don't know nothing about this case, but Mary just seems like she's the one where she takes that, snitches get stitches to like a real level that you just don't want to fuck with.
A real level.
Look at that little boy. He already got stitches and he didn't even snitch.
Mm-hmm.
He was just there.
Mm-hmm. So police notified the local authority of the incidents and of Mary's violent nature, but due to their age, both girls were simply given a warning. No further action was taken.
What about their parents? Who did they know? Did they notify the parents? Like, were they like, "Hey, you're
yeah, probably because they interviewed them.
She's a little.
We watching them. Well, the parents in this story probably aren't the ones to rely on.
Oh, okay.
Let's talk a little bit about Mary Bell's history, shall we?
We shall.
So Mary's mother, Elizabeth Betty Bell, was a well-known local prostitute who was often absent from home frequently traveling to Glasgow to work and simply leaving her children in the care of their father, if he was present.
Oh,
Mary was Betty's second child, born when Betty herself was only 17 years old. The identity of Mary's biological father is unknown. It's speculated that he could have been one of Betty's anonymous clients. For most of her life, Mary believed her father to be William Billy Bell, a violent drunkard and habitual criminal with an arrest record for crimes, including armed robbery. However, Mary was already a small toddler when William Bell married her mother, and it is unknown if he is her actual biological father. Mary was an unwanted and neglected child. According to her aunt, Isa McCricket, within minutes of Mary's birth, her mother had resented hospital staff attempting to place her daughter in her arms, shouting, "Take the thing away from me."
damn.
As a baby, toddler, and young child, Mary frequently suffered injuries and household accidents while alone with her mother, which led her family to believe that either her mother was deliberately negligent or intentionally attempting to harm or kill her daughter. On one occasion in about 1960, when Mary was only 3 years old, Betty dropped her daughter from a first-floor window. On another occasion, she dosed her daughter with sleeping pills to keep her quiet. She's also known to have once sold Mary to a mentally unstable woman who was unable to have children of her own, resulting in Betty's older sister, Catherine, having to travel alone across Newcastle to reclaim Mary from this individual and return the child to her mother's home on White House Road.
Jesus Christ.
Despite her blatant negligence and abuse of her child, Mary's mother refused repeated offers from her family to take custody of her daughter, whom Betty, as a dominatrix, is alleged to have begun allowing and or encouraging several of her clients to also sexually abuse in sadomasochistic sessions by the mid-60s.
Ugh.
Keeping in mind that in the mid-60s, Mary would have been 10-ish. Not surprisingly, both at home and at school, Mary exhibited numerous signs of disturbed and unpredictable behavior, including sudden mood swings and chronic bedwetting. She's known to have frequently fought with other children, both boys and girls, and to have attempted to strangle or suffocate her classmates or playmates on several occasions. On one such occasion, she is known to have attempted to block the trachea of a young girl with sand. This violent behavior made many children reluctant to socialize with Mary, who would frequently spend her free time with Norma Joyce Bell, the 13-year-old daughter of a next-door neighbor. And although Norma and Mary have the same last name, they weren't related.
They're not related?
Mm-mm. But isn't that funny?
I mean, they were kind of giving me, I thought that they were kind of giving me like, Shining twin sister vibes.
Very much that
little
vibe,
bit.
but they're not related.
Interesting. Okay.
According to one classmate at DeLaval Road Junior School, by 1968, Mary and her peers had become accustomed to the sudden and marked changes in Mary's behavior. And when she began exhibiting distressful mannerisms, including shaking her head and forming a steely gaze, her peers instinctively knew she was headed towards violence, with the focus of her stare being the individual she would attack.
You know what? People could have said the same thing about me.
Truly.
Sometimes that happens to me still to this day.
Mm-hmm. Kind of lose yourself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, but on a real, like, you can't, like, I mean, given her history at home, God, that's tough. Because, I mean, clearly, like, there is a relation there to to her home history, and then like her mental stability as she gets older.
And we can kind of talk about that in our wrap up of this case. I know a lot of times, like, not to get too far into it now, but I know a lot of times I'm very skeptical of tragic backstories, because if you research true crime enough, if you look at enough cases, I mean, we've been doing this a while, you really, a lot of times that information is coming from the killer themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of need to take it with a grain of salt, right? Like, BTK was a piece of shit, but he'll tell you he had a tragic backstory. Ted Bundy will tell you the whole thing was about porn, and porn turned him into, and violence in the American cinema and on TV turned him into this monster. It did not. Ted Bundy was a monster, was a monster, was a monster. It didn't have anything to do with porn. And although it's interesting to kind of look at how those things intersect, you have to take it with a grain of salt. This case, though, we're dealing with a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
You know? And even though a lot of those allegations of the dominatrix stuff come from Mary herself, the negligence was documented in other ways. And, it's not so much of a stretch to believe that if there's extreme negligence and abuse of that level, for me, it's not that big of a jump. And it's a little bit more believable than some of the tragic backstories that murderers try to feed us, and two, you have violence. There is some history of violence towards animals with Mary, or at least alleged violence towards animals. And you have the bedwetting, the McDonald triad. If you guys we've talked about that on the show before. So I think the signs are there. I'm not a child psychologist or anything, but the signs are there that Mary was pretty significantly abused. So that's why I said it's sad too.
Yeah.
Anywho, so we have this incident that happens in early May, and it kind of just blows over, which is weird that a 3-year-old was found bleeding from the head and wandering around, and we just let that go.
It's strange. It's just a little strange.
So on, a couple weeks later, on May 25th, 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Mary Bell was to commit the first of 2 murders for which she would become infamous. At some point early in the day, Mary strangled 4-year-old Martin Brown in an upstairs bedroom of a derelict house located at 85 St. Margaret's Road. She is believed to have committed the deed alone. Brown's body was discovered by 3 children at approximately 3:30 p.m. He lay on his back with his arms stretched above his head, and aside from specks of blood and foam around his mouth, no signs of violence were visible on his body. A local workman named John Hall soon arrived on the scene. He attempted to perform CPR, but to no avail. Martin Brown was long gone. As Hall attempted CPR, Mary and Norma appeared in the doorway. Both girls were quickly shooed out of the house, and they subsequently knocked on the door of Martin's aunt, Miss Rita Finlay, and informed her matter-of-factly, quote, "One of your sister's bairns has just had an accident. We think it's Martin, but we can't tell because there's blood all over him." End quote.
And how old did you say she was at this point?
10, just about. It's the day before her 11th birthday.
Day before her 11th birthday. Okay.
The following day, Dr. Bernard Knight conducted a postmortem on Martin's body. Knight was unable to find any signs of violence on the child's body and thus was unable to determine his cause of death, although he was able to discount the investigators' theory that the child had died of poisoning through ingesting tablets. An inquest on June 7th returned an open verdict. So basically they have no definitive cause of death. The next day, or actually later that day, it's Mary's 11th birthday, she and Norma broke into and vandalized a nursery in the nearby community of Woodland Crescent.
Woodland Crescent.
Which just sounds uptight.
Yeah.
Woodland Crescent.
Woodland Crescent.
The story's in the UK, by the way, so I'm fighting the urge to put on a thick accent and offend all of our UK listeners.
Our UK listeners, they're like, no, God, please don't. Don't do that to us.
So for Mary's birthday, she and Norma decide to break into and vandalize this nursery. They entered the nursery by peeling tiles off the slate roof. And then once they were inside, they started tearing up books, upturning desks, and smearing ink and craft paint all around the property before escaping. The day after, staff discovered the break-in and vandalism and immediately notified the police, who also discovered 4 separate notes, which claimed responsibility for Martin Brown's murder. One of these notes read, quote, "I murder so that I may come back," end quote. Another read, and there's a lot of misspellings here, but I'm just going to read what I think they wrote. Quote, "We did murder Martin Brown. Fuck off, you bastard." A third note simply read, quote, "Fuck off, we murder. Watch out, Fanny and faggot."
Oh.
The final note was the most complex, reading, quote, "You are mice. Why? Because we murdered Martin Brown. You better look out. There are murders about by Fanny and old faggot, you screws. End quote.
Fuck? What kind of like UK slang is that?
Well, yeah, it's very UK slang. So
UK people, explain. Translate.
Well, I was going to tell you what it meant, but I think I'd love for the Facebook group, for the UK folks in the Facebook group, to tell you what slang for fanny is.
I would have. Well,
so maybe I'm just going to let.
We're just going to let
discovered.
it. Just.
I will say that after you know what fanny means, you will never approach a fanny pack the same.
Oh.
So I'll just let you. Just let that that one's
screws was
simmer.
another one, right?
You screws. I mean, I think that means like you
assholes.
Degenerative term. Yeah.
Like just a regular.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think faggot meant cigarette in the 60s. So I'm not really sure. About that one. Anyway, I mean, it also means cigarette now because like sometimes they'll say like, "Have you got a spare fag?"
Yeah.
And that's
like.
Short
it's just
faggot,
weird in that
cigarette.
Context, like
definitely because we're like you drop that in America and you're like,
I'm
nope.
like, I don't give a shit if you are 10 years old, bitch.
Ham.
I'm on 10 turning 11, bitch. Okay, you about to take these 10 fiery fingers right now, and then another one to grow on because we about to throw down. I don't give a shit.
Where are you getting the 11th one from?
10.
You want to borrow it?
10. You're going to get 10. You're going to catch these 10 digits, right? And then you're going to get,
where's the one to grow
5,
on coming from?
I guess it would be. I was trying to think you'd get like another slap as like the additional for like the one, but
like
that would be
gift.
That would be 5.
That would be 5 with the way you
unless I just like poked her really and just like
sternly in the
just
shoulder.
Like poked her really hard in the shoulder, just like
do better,
bitch.
Oh, so basically we have this whole nursery vandalization, which the police, we find these notes, and the police just kind of dismiss this incident as a tasteless and childish prank.
This is and that's exactly what they said.
Yes.
This is a tasteless and childish. This is a tasteless and childish prank. Okay. Right. We're talking about murder, though, but that's fine.
Yeah. So it seemed Mary and Norma weren't done making a spectacle. 2 days later, on May 29th, shortly before the funeral of Martin Brown, in a game of chicken, both girls called upon the house of Martin's mother, June, asking to see her son. When June Brown replied that they couldn't see her son because he was deceased, Mary replied, quote, "Oh, I know he's dead. I want to see him in his coffin." End quote.
That strikes a nerve with me.
Hard to defend.
That strikes a nerve with me.
Yeah. But keep in mind, you're dealing with, at this point, an 11-year-old. And this is very, like, she's very messy, right? We have this nursery vandalization. There are notes that are left everywhere. She's saying things like that to Martin's mother. They paid a visit to that other boy's aunt. It's very not well thought out, which is what we see in a lot of cases where you have a child perpetrating murder. They are very messy, particularly teenagers and crimes of passion with teenagers. They're so messy.
Yeah.
There's no, you don't have like the teenage mastermind who like murders somebody and hides it perfectly. And that doesn't really exist. I mean, I'm sure that there are cases here and there. If you know of those cases, I would love to see them. thehauntedheartpodcast@gmail.com. But off the top of my head, like I can't really think of an example of that because typically what you see in cases that involve children as the perpetrator, it is messy like this. It is obvious. And there are, these things that are happening and the police just kind of seem to be shrugging things off. But it does come together fairly quickly. I feel like it should have come together quicker, but hindsight's 20/20, right?
Yeah.
So despite Mary's extremely abhorrent behavior, the police did not consider her a suspect in the murder of Martin Brown. Left to her own devices and seemingly free of any consequences for her violent actions, though, it was only a matter of time before Mary killed again.
Well, I'm assuming she had the that cloak of like, oh, it wouldn't be
right.
Not her,
yeah,
not a 11-year-old girl,
right?
Like There's no way in the world that she would do that. So I'm pretty sure she probably felt a little powerful in that sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
nobody's going to suspect me, right?
Yeah. And it was true. I mean, this is the 60s. Everybody's less jaded. I don't know. But they don't immediately jump to, oh, it must have been this 11-year-old girl, right? Because this was a huge
I'm gonna tell you
case
what.
of like, how could this happen?
Try
right?
that shit in 2021. Bitch, that's the first one I'm going to. It was
We've
the
had too
child.
many orphan-themed movies.
It was the child. Uh-huh. There are several, yes, children are the first ones that I would
Are you
suspect.
keeping a list? Were you about to say there are several children that
I
capable?
side-eye. Yes, I absolutely do.
Oh, God. I think you side-eye everybody.
True.
So, on the afternoon of July 31st, about 2.5 months after, a 3-year-old named Brian Howe was last seen by his parents in the street outside his house playing with one of his siblings and the family dog. And Mary and Norma Bell.
Trouble.
When Brian did not return home later that afternoon, concerned relatives and neighbors searched the streets without success. Shortly after 11 p.m., a search party discovered Brian's body between 2 large concrete blocks. The first policeman to arrive at the scene observed that a deliberate but feeble attempt had been made to conceal the body, which was covered in clumps of grass and weeds. Cyanosis was evident upon the child's bluish-colored lips, and several bruises and scratches were evident upon his neck. A pair of broken scissors lay close to his feet. The coroner would later conclude that Brian Howe had died of strangulation and that he had been deceased for up to 7.5 hours prior to the discovery of his body. The killer had evidently squeezed Brian's nostrils closed with one hand as he or she had gripped his throat with the other. Numerous puncture wounds had been inflicted to the child's legs before death. Sections of his hair had been cut from his head, his genitals had been partially mutilated, and a crude attempt had been made to carve the initial M into his stomach. The relatively small amount of force used to murder the child led the coroner to conclude the murderer was more than likely another child.
Okay.
Numerous gray and maroon fibers were discovered upon Brian's clothing and shoes. Now, these fibers did not source from any clothing within the Howe household. Police therefore concluded that they had been transferred to the child by his murderer or murderers.
So bits of her hair got onto him is what they
Well,
were saying,
these
right?
fibers,
Or fibers,
these
or is
gray and maroon colored
it-
fibers
okay.
are on his body. And they didn't match anything that was in the Howe household. Fibers were like a big thing for a while, like heading into the 70s. Like we were all looking for from the 70s to like the 90s before we got into like DNA and all that. Like fibers were like
They're
a big
like,
thing.
I'm really into fibers right now.
Now I think they're actually inadmissible. I don't know if they're inadmissible, but they're not considered
As
like
probably as
conclusive
concrete,
evidence.
right?
Yeah.
Because it could honestly
Right.
come from anywhere.
So, the discovery of Brian Howe's body sparked a large-scale manhunt. Over 100 detectives were assigned to the investigation, and more than 1,200 children had been questioned with regards to their whereabouts by August 2nd. On August 1st, detectives questioned Mary and Norma Bell, whom witnesses had already informed investigators had been seen playing with Brian shortly before he was believed to have died. In her initial interview, Norma seemed excitable, whereas Mary was markedly more observant and reserved. Although both girls were evasive and contradictory in their initial statements, they freely admitted to having played with Brian on the date of his death, but denied having seen him after lunchtime. Questioned further the following day, Mary stated that she remembered seeing an 8-year-old local boy playing with Brian on the afternoon of July 31st, and that she had also seen him hitting the child. Furthermore, she stated that she also remembered that the boy had been covered in grass and weeds as if he'd been rolling in a field, and that he had in his possession a small pair of scissors. Mary then expounded, quote, I saw him trying to cut a cat's tail off with the scissors, but there was something wrong with them. One leg was broken or bent, end quote. This self-incriminating statement convinced Detective Chief Inspector James Dobson that Mary was the actual killer.
I was thinking that too. You played yourself.
As only the police knew about the broken scissors found at the crime scene. In addition, the local boy she named was quickly questioned and was discovered to have been at Newcastle International Airport on the afternoon of July 31st, with numerous witnesses able to corroborate his parents' claims.
Huh.
So on the afternoon of August 4th, the parents of Norma Bell contacted the police, stating their daughter wished to confess what she knew of the death of Brian Howe. Inspector Dobson arrived at their home, formally cautioned Norma, and then asked what she knew. Norma informed Dobson that Mary had taken her to see Brian's body before its discovery by the search party. Mary had then demonstrated to her how she strangled the child. According to Norma, Mary had confessed to her that she had enjoyed strangling the child, before describing how she had inflicted the scour marks to his stomach with a razor blade, which had been hidden at the crime scene, and the broken scissors. Norma then led police to the crime scene and revealed the location where the razor blade was hidden. A drawing Norma made of the wounds inflicted to the boy's abdomen precisely matched those described by the coroner. Mary Bell was visited at her home in the early hours of August 5th, the following day. On this occasion, she was notably defensive when confronted with the discrepancies in her previous statement. She informed detectives, quote, "You're trying to brainwash me. I will get a lawyer to get me out of this." End quote.
Who? You go, ma'am.
You got lawyer money.
You got, yeah. It don't appear that you would have. I don't think she would have
Actually,
lawyer money.
Lawyer's a very American term. I believe in the UK it would be solicitor.
A solicitor?
You got solicitor coins. You got solicitor money.
I don't think. Yeah, no, that would be okay, little girl.
Girl, that was like my
That's
mama.
why
When I was 11, my mama was coming at me. I was wanting a Happy Meal, and she would come at me asking me if I had McDonald's money.
Yeah, exactly.
Mary Bell, it's you got solicitor money.
You got, yeah, that's exactly what I'd be. Put me in that situation. I'd be like, okay, all right, little girl, what you got?
Okay,
what you gonna do? Absolutely nothing. All right, sit your ass down.
So Mary's sort of in hot water, and the temperature is just increasing. Later that same day, on August 5th, Norma was questioned again. This time, she made a full statement in which she admitted to being present when Mary had actually strangled Brian. According to Norma, when the trio were alone, Mary seemed to go all funny, pushing the child into the grass and attempting to strangle him before stating to her, quote, "My hands are getting thick. Take over," end quote. Norma claimed she had then run from the scene, leaving Mary alone with Brian.
That's a lying ass little girl right there. I'm gonna tell you what. It's a lying ass little bitch right there. And I can call it right now.
A forensic examination of clothing owned by both girls revealed the gray fibers upon Brian's body were a precise match to a woolen dress owned by Mary. The maroon fibers on the child's shoes were a precise match to a skirt owned by Norma.
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, the same gray fibers had also been found upon the body of Martin Brown.
Uh-huh.
Brian Howe was buried in a local cemetery on August 7th, 1968, in a ceremony attended by over 200 people. According to Detective Chief Inspector Dobson, who had planned to arrest both girls later that day, Mary Bell stood outside the Howe household as the child's coffin was brought from the home at the beginning of the funeral procession. Dobson later stated, quote, "She stood there, laughing and rubbing her hands. I thought, my God, I've got to bring her in. She'll do another one."
Why hadn't she been brought in at that point?
I don't know, because y'all first started seriously, y'all got a confession from a so-called accomplice on August 4th, and y'all hadn't arrested this girl on August 7th. Y'all gonna wait till the funeral's over to arrest her? Maybe it was a courtesy thing, but I feel like you probably ought to just go get her.
Right. And why is she even there anyway?
Come get her.
Who let her in? The fuck?
Yeah.
Who in fuck invited you?
Yeah.
Nasty little girl.
Very, yeah. Mm-hmm. So both girls were finally formally charged with the murder of Brian Howe at 8 p.m. that evening following the funeral. In response to this charge, Mary replied, "That's all right by me." Norma, however, burst into tears, simply proclaiming, I'll pay you back for this."
Talking to Mary.
I guess, I don't know.
Ooh.
I don't know. In the
Girls
presence
are
of
fighting.
In the presence of an independent witness, Mary prepared a written statement in which she admitted to being present when Brian Howe was murdered, but insisting the murder had been committed by Norma. She also admitted she and Norma had broken into the Woodland Crescent nursery the day after the murder of Martin Brown, defacing the property before the two had written the 4 handwritten notes. Shortly after their arrest, both girls underwent psychological evaluations. The results of these tests revealed Norma was intellectually delayed and a submissive character who easily displayed emotion, whereas Mary was a bright yet cunning character, prone to sudden mood swings. Occasionally, Mary was willing to talk, although she quickly became sullen, introspective, and defensive in nature. The 4 psychiatrists who examined Mary concluded that, although not suffering from a mental disorder, she suffered from a psychopathic personality disorder. In his official report compiled for the Director of Public Prosecutions, Dr. David Westbury concluded, Mary's social techniques are primitive and take the form of automatic denial, ingratiation, manipulation, complaining, bullying, fight, flight, or violence. Which, not really surprised there. Of course, you're not to make excuses because there are none, but your social techniques would be primitive if you don't have anyone around to teach you social techniques.
Exactly.
Socialization is a process. It is not something that happens automatically.
Yeah. But I'm still cutting my eyes at Norma, though.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how, you got to watch out for them quiet ones, right? I know, because I am a quiet one. No, but I'm cutting eyes at her at this point.
So the trial of Mary and Norma Bell for the murders of Martin Brown and Brian Howe began on December 5th, 1968. Both girls pleaded not guilty to the charges. Against protests from both defense counsels, on the first day of the trial, the judge waived the defendants' right to anonymity on account of their age. As such, the media were allowed to publicize the names, ages, and photographs of both girls throughout the duration of the trial, and they definitely took advantage of that right. This case was highly publicized. It was one of those sensational cases where, the media took it and they ran with it. Child murderer. It's unfortunate, but it sells newspapers, right?
Yeah.
And they plastered those girls' images everywhere.
It's interesting, though, like talking about age. They were still 11 years old.
Right.
Right? So, that's crazy.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where, the 2 boys that were murdered were very young, even younger than the girls, which is how they were able to overpower them. And I think the public response, this is sort of one of those cases that was tried in the media. And I think the public response to the likelihood that you have 2 11-year-old murderers evoked such a sentiment that, even the judge, I don't think was immune to it because of this, waiving of the right to anonymity. I think that perhaps judgment may have been clouded by the horror of the crime.
Yeah.
And being horrified that somebody could do that at 10 or 11 years old. Because again, it takes a long time for them to be arrested. The murder of Martin Brown was not it wasn't difficult to solve, right? It was just that detectives were not looking at children because that just wasn't a thing that was part of the public consciousness.
Yeah, it wasn't on their radar.
Yeah, it just wasn't. They wouldn't have even thought to seriously consider that an 11-year-old, at that point, a 10-year-old girl could be their murderer. And so I think when that came out, there was kind of, the tides were already quite turned against them. The trial was actually really interesting in itself, but we don't have time to get into all that here. Suffice it to say that in the end, Mary Bell was cleared of murder, but convicted of manslaughter of both boys on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Norma Bell, on the other hand, was acquitted of all charges. Upon hearing the jury's verdicts, Norma clapped her hands in excitement, and Mary burst into tears as her mother and grandmother also cried over her fate. When passing the sentence, the judge described Mary as a dangerous individual, adding that she posed a very grave risk to other children and that steps must be taken to protect the public from her. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which basically means that she would serve an indefinite sentence of imprisonment, which apparently is a thing that you can just be detained at Her Majesty's
At Her Majesty's pleasure.
Which basically means you get out when I fucking say you get out,
Like,
I guess.
who,
Like,
the
time
queen?
out,
Like,
you can
does
get
the
up.
queen, like, make that decision at some
This
point?
is like some shit from my childhood where my mom's just like, you in time out. How long am I in time out? Till I say you can get up.
Exactly.
That's how long. At Her Majesty's pleasure.
At Her Majesty's pleasure. Interesting. So I'm assuming that they probably, well, first, what's the difference between like murder and manslaughter?
So I'm not a lawyer, but
Like, I'm trying to understand the difference between the two.
and
like,
this is also a UK case. So there may be nuances that I'm not getting, but I know at least in the States, like murder, you have to prove intention. Manslaughter is you killed a person.
like,
So like
could
if
be
I hit you with my
accidental
car and killed you and they couldn't prove that I intended to hit you with my car and murder you, then they could charge me with manslaughter. Because I killed you regardless. The end result is the same.
Got it. So, like, if you were like a drunk driver, hit someone, kill them, that would be manslaughter.
Right.
Got
Right.
it.
Versus if
You see someone and you hate them and you run them down.
Yes. And you've been planning on doing it and you put like fucking crazy ass tires on your car and shit like that. Right.
Yeah.
And then you hide your car and you take it to a fucking car wash and all that
Me
shit.
at all the bicyclists on the road
Yes.
that take up the road and don't follow any of the
Laws of
traffic, even though they're supposed to. Yeah. I'm just kidding, though. Like, that's JK.
That's
Please don't ever use that
That's
me.
JK. Yeah.
That's me in court, like, if that ever happens.
That's JK.
That's JK.
Yeah. So, but like I said, there may be nuances in UK law that I don't know of.
Like
but
Her Majesty's pleasure.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know.
Yes.
We don't know when Her Majesty's pleasure will be sufficed.
Satiated.
Satiated.
Yes. So, and I'm assuming that the rationale there is that she's so young, you can't prove intent with an 11-year-old. Like you can't, like, I'm assuming that something with the psyche vows, like you can't lay out that she actually intended to take a life.
That bitch wrote a note.
True, but do they really understand the consequences of their actions, right? Like, do they understand that this is permanent and that, like, do they understand what murder is? It's a whole thing. But anyway, basically they were like, you're going to jail and you're going to stay there till we figure out what to do with you. But she was released from HM Prison Arkham Grange in May 1980.
Was it really called Arkham?
It was actually called Askham.
Oh.
Damn.
It's like, damn.
No, I'm just dyslexic. Askham
Askham?
Grange. Arkham would have been so much more
Askham?
badass. Fucking Batman.
We just ask him.
Askham. Askham actually is how it's
Askham.
spelled.
Askham.
Askham.
Ask him.
Anyway, May 1980, Mary is 23. She's released from prison. There is this whole side adventure, by the way, with like one of her like prison mates. That's not what they call them. Fellow inmates? Like roommates? I don't know.
A friend.
She and this other girl that was also up
Her
in
girlfriend.
prison. I don't know if they were dating, but they escaped prison for like a couple weeks or something. Like she basically just like went on the fucking lam. And I was like, what the hell? I think she was like 17 or 19. But anyway, that was
She
that was
didn't
wild.
kill anyone, did she?
No. She
Okay.
just got out of prison, was out of prison. I think she and the girl, I don't think they were dating because they went to meet up with
Well, I meant
two
like
guys.
just like girlfriend, like friend. Like,
Oh, yeah. Like
I
my
didn't
girl.
mean like actual girlfriend,
I
but
mean,
like, I mean, whatever.
live
Either
your
way.
life. Orange is the new black and all. But no, they met up with these two guys and went to like Glasgow, I think, to just
Okay.
party and chill. So but regardless, I mean, I feel like if that happened in the States, they're putting you back in jail and you about to be in jail for a long time,
I would,
right?
yeah.
But they let her out at 23, so I guess they weren't that mad about it. In 1980, and she had served like a total of 11 and a half years in custody. She was granted anonymity, including a new name, allowing her to start a new life elsewhere in the country under an assumed identity. Upon her release, a spokesman is quoted as saying, Mary Bell wishes to be given a chance to live a normal life and to be left alone. 4 years after her release from custody, on May 25th, 1984, Bell gave birth to a daughter. This would prove to be her only child. Her daughter knew nothing of her mother's past until 1998, when reporters discovered Bell's then current location in a resort town on the Sussex coast, where both of them had been living for approximately 18 months. This media revelation forced Bell and her 14-year-old daughter to leave their home and to be driven to a safe house by undercover officers. Both mother and daughter later relocated to another part of the UK. The right to anonymity granted to Bell's daughter following her birth was originally only extended until the daughter reached the age of 18. However, in 2003, Bell won a high court battle to have her own anonymity and that of her daughter extended for life. This order was later updated to include Bell's granddaughter, born in January 2009, who was referred to as Z. In 1998, Bell collaborated with author Gita Sereni to provide an account of her life before and after her crimes for Sereni's 1998 book, Cries Unheard, The Story of Mary Bell. Within this book, Bell details the abuse she suffered as a child at the hands of her mother, whom Bell describes as a prostitute, sex worker, and a dominatrix. And she alleges several of her mother's clients. Others interviewed for the book include relatives, friends, and professionals who knew Mary before, during, and after her imprisonment. Bell's current whereabouts are unknown and remain protected by the 2003 High Court order. According to Gita Sereni, Bell does not claim she was wrongfully convicted and freely admits the abuse she suffered as a child is no excuse for her strangling her two victims. And that, my dear, is the story of Mary Bell.
Interesting. There haven't been any occurrences that we know of with her since then. She's led a
very quiet life.
Life. I'm assuming, she's got a kid and a grandkid.
Mm-hmm.
And they're okay.
Yeah.
We're assuming. We can only assume, I guess.
Yeah, they're the biggest thing now, I think, is her anonymity that she's concerned about. And it seems that has been extended indefinitely.
What about that other motherfucker?
What do you mean?
Norma. What happened to her?
Don't know.
Interesting.
Don't know. I'm trying to figure out exactly how old she would be now. I should have figured that out. She's only 64, by the way. Mary Bell is only 64 years old today. So she's not old. This is not so long ago that, that this person is dead and gone or super old or
right.
It's not an ears situation where they're elderly. She's only 64. She's fairly young.
So it's interesting because clearly, the fact that, you had these young lives cut short is absolutely heartbreaking and tragic. And it's brutal. The way that they were, sort of taken out of this world was extremely brutal. And it's hard to get past that when you are looking at this case, because you have these two 11-year-old girls who you can only, you want to sort of demonize them, but when you look at certain situations, like you said, with, their history at home and all of that, it brings into question, does situations like that, and it's different for everybody, I'm assuming in different situations, but was that just something, did that just exacerbate something that was just already within her? You know what I mean? And help facilitate that and bring it to life? Or is she a product of that? You know what I mean? And it's interesting when you kind of take this situation, because if you made the argument that someone is, intentionally, if they are just hardwired that way, right, to be predisposed to, murder or violence, and then that it just kind of grows and sort of festers depending on how they are brought up, right? From that point on, she's led a pretty normal life, right? So it's how do you have that argument? It's just interesting.
It's nature versus nurture. I think, it's not really about what I think. It's, the psychiatrist who examined Mary Bell said that there was psychopathic tendencies there, right? Psychopathic personality disorder was the diagnosis. And you're seeing, with the McDonald triad, you see early signs of that as well. That points to a psychopathic personality disorder. So I do think that there's some level of that is inherent, that is scientific, that is embedded in her DNA, right? But I do think that the environment that is alleged would have also contributed in a major way. And there's a lot of evidence backing up neglect and abuse from other members of the family, both before and after the case, that corroborates that story of, her mother being this not very good person. And by the way, not to say that just because her mom was a sex worker, she's a terrible mom. There are plenty of people who are sex workers who are great moms. She was a sex worker and a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Not a piece of shit because she was a sex worker. We're sex positive. But I do think that if Mary was not if the boundaries were not appropriate within that home, that would have had an impact on her from an early age.
Yeah. What's
more fascinating to me in this story, really, than Mary is Norma.
Yeah.
Because you do see it in twos, right? In pairs of killers. You see there's a stronger personality and a weaker personality. And the weaker personality is sort of drawn in by the magnetism of the stronger personality. And then they do things supposedly that's outside of what they would normally be capable of on their own. We've seen that with other paired killers. And there's actually a lot of research that has been done on that link, right? When you take a person who otherwise would not have been a killer, and maybe they have a bit more of a weaker will or personality, and you pair them with this strong-willed person who sort of pulls them into these situations, and then they find themselves in a situation that they never would have been in on their own. I don't know. I don't think there's enough in this story about Norma's background for us to really know. And, I would posit that, is it true that Norma was a weak-willed child, that she was your normal average 11-year-old who was pulled in by Mary Bell, who, had all of this psychosis happening and had that strong magnetic personality? Maybe. Is it also possible that Norma faked emotionality and faked being weaker in order to get out of any responsibility?
Yeah, so that's why I kind of question and side-eye that initially, because, you see hints of that where she kind of talks about oh, I wasn't there, but, and then reality she was, right? So trying to get out of it. I also think that in those situations with those paired killers, that often that more submissive one tends to be probably a little bit more manipulative in the way that they could see that, if she was with Mary and she was a stronger personality and she was the one that would have that ability to go out and murder someone, if Norma felt like she could just fan that flame, so to speak, you know what I mean? And sort of work through her. Now, not to completely, clearly Mary has her own, she's responsible and all of that. We're definitely going to hold her accountable, but it is interesting to think about, because that's why I was side-eyeing that little girl. Because and it's a little weird.
It is unusual because I think about what would a normal, quote unquote, a normal
motherfucker wouldn't have even been over there.
Well,
you crazy.
I think about what an average 11-year-old child would do if they see another child murdering somebody, right? And I just don't know many that would stay and be part of it and actively cover it up, right? Because Norma didn't tell anybody. So if you didn't do it, why do you feel that you can't tell anybody? Now, it's possible that Mary said, if you tell anybody, I'm going to kill you. And she saw her kill Brian Howe. So maybe she didn't tell anybody because she didn't want to get killed. That's possible. But I find that, and I've always felt that way about Mary Bell's story. A lot of people get caught up in, and it is, terrifying. This 11-year-old child with a steely gaze who just murders without a second thought. But also, I've always found it odd that we don't look at Norma more and we don't dig into her. Where did she come from? What was her family life like?
Yeah.
What did that look like? Is she truly weak-willed, or was she more into it? Was she more of an active player than perhaps was suggested?
Yeah.
Because even if, there have been dual pairs of murderers that have been at it before. I forget. Oh, shit. I can't remember the name of the Moores murders. Can't remember the name of the murderers. But anyway, fuck them. They were terrible. They murdered a bunch of people. It'll come to me like right after we get off
Moore's
the mic.
murder.
Anyway,
She was a she's
she
one
was
of your very
blonde.
few Leo murderers, actually.
Yes, I can't.
'Cause I remember
Anyway,
reading
fuck.
that.
Everybody is screaming it at us. But anyway, if you
I
know
know who
that
you're talking
case,
about, yeah.
she participated in that case. And her defense was that she was they sort of had that thing going on where he was the really strong personality and she was the weaker willed and she was sort of pulled into his orbit. She was still punished for her crimes. But in this case, Norma's not. And is that correct because she's 11 and maybe she just got roped into some psychopathy? Or is that maybe questionable?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that I don't know, the fact that you were there, you stayed there. You were there from like when she was pushing that kid off the roof, supposedly, and then initially
actively covered it up.
and actively covered it up. And then you tried to, she tried to snitch a little bit and tried to put the blame, she actively went and put the blame on Mary initially. Right. So I don't know.
Very interesting case. But yeah, that is Mary Bell, one of the first and most notorious child murderers.
All right. Well, child murderers, folks. There you have it. This week on the Haunted Heart podcast.
Yeah. Light topics for
Light
cocktail
topics.
conversations.
Yeah.
The Haunted Heart podcast. Light topics for cocktail conversations. Do you need something to talk about as you gather around the water cooler with your masks on because COVID safety? Consider listening to the Haunted Heart podcast so that you can alienate yourself from all other human beings.
That should be our next promo if we ever make a new one.
Yeah. That's the marketing pitch.
Yeah, that's absolutely the marketing pitch. Yep.
And we
Wow.
wonder why we don't get sponsors, man.
That's
That's
true.
the pitch. It's great.
That's
Sterling.
true.
How could you argue with that?
I wouldn't argue with it, but no, thank you for that. That was interesting. I had never heard of that case before. Like you said, it's, with me, I don't know a lot of like true crime cases. I don't really get involved with it. So it's interesting to hear about these because it's just, I don't know. It's just like, I like being like when you sit down with me and then you tell me like you just talking to me versus like researching it or like listening to it. So like I like
listening to it like everybody listening to this
I like
podcast
listening
right
to
now.
like everybody else listens to this podcast. Exactly. Yeah. Like we said at the beginning of the show, I'm there with them.
No, I love it though, because it does it is fun to like go over these cases like this with you because it brings like a fresh energy to it, right?
Does it?
It does. It brings a fresh energy to it. So I appreciate you. Thanks for being
Ted
my
Bundy,
co-host.
never heard of him.
Never
Gacy,
never heard of him. Who?
Who's she?
Who?
Who's she? Don't
What
know
is
her.
pogo? Is that like a pogo stick?
Who's her? I don't know. Who?
Oh
Pogo.
no. Pogo stick. Pogo. Jumping on it. Jumping on the pogo.
Yeah,
I hate it.
yeah.
I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it a lot. Do the
Got it.
sign off. I need to take a shower now.
Yes. All right, folks. But before we sign off, I did want to, you did mention at the start of the episode that we are going into spooky season.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
So,
What you know about spooky season, boy?
boy,
Boy.
good. Yes. So be on the lookout, folks, because we've got something fun headed your way pretty soon. So. Just keep a check on those social medias there.
Keep
Got
your
something
eyes
fun
peeled.
coming for the spooky Halloween season. But until then, you can check us out on Instagram at The Haunted Heart
Podcast.
Podcast, Twitter at The Haunted Heart, and Facebook at the Haunted Heart Podcast. We've got a page there that you can go there and like. We also have a group where if you go and search the Haunted Heart Podcast, you can ask to join. You have to ask. And, that's fine because we will accept just about anybody unless you're Mary Bell. What if we already have Mary Bell?
What if we already
group?
have her in the group and she's going to be mad? She's going to be big mad this week. Ooh.
Yeah. So, as long as you're not Mary Bell or any other child murderer, we'll accept you.
Or just don't tell us that you are.
That's
also
true. And it's private. So, any of the weird, crazy, creepy, shit that you want to post and that you'll see, it's all for the rest of us here. You ain't got to worry about, your mama, your daddy, your aunts, your uncles, all them people, your cousins going back and telling, everyone at church on Sunday what they saw you post on your Facebook. You ain't got to worry about that because it's a private little circle here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all good. No judgment. And then, like we said at the top of the episode, if you want to support the show, you can check us out at patreon.com/thehauntedheart. Plenty of tiers there. Well, yeah, plenty of tiers. Tears all around. There for you to select from if you wish to support the show. And, even if you don't want to do that, a great way to support the show is to just send us some love, send us an email, a message, DM, slide into them, or leave us a Google review.
Yeah.
We love that.
Hell yeah. Or as part of spooky season, you could be a spooky season evangelist and just share the show with your friends.
Absolutely.
Because that grows our weird little culty family.
Definitely. Most definitely. But I think that's it. I think we swept up, cleaned up, got everything Swiffered up, ready to go.
Ready to go.
And like I said at the start of the episode, we'll see you win.
No, we will see you guys next week. We are sticking with our Wednesday schedule.
Yep.
So we will see you midweek. And, well, I guess we won't see you midweek. Or maybe we will.
Maybe
we will see you. But we'll meet you back here at the appointed hour. And until then, remember to stay spooky.